In this video, Sabretooth starts killing the X-Men, and yes, this takes place in the main Marvel universe. It is not in an alternate reality. So this opens up with Sabretooth killing Cyclops while he's being watched by both Wolverine and an entire audience of multiversal versions of himself. So what in the world is going on here? Okay, so here's the thing. The last video that we covered for Sabretooth in Marvel Comics was kind of the follow-up to when he had been thrown in the pit in the mutant nation of Krakoa, literally where all the X-Men and those guys lived. The pit was basically a prison, but Sabretooth had realized he could control the prison, and then eventually he could leave the prison. And so along with other mutants that had been thrown down there, he essentially freed himself. And then they ended up taking off in a story called Sabretooth and the Exiles, which we haven't covered yet. In that story, his son, Graydon Creed, which is actually the result of Sabretooth and Mystique having a son, that Graydon Creed had just been traveling the multiverse, killing all these different versions of Sabretooth. And he finally got his hands on the main Sabretooth, told him what he'd been doing, and then the main Sabretooth, along with all the other Sabretooths that hadn't been killed yet, ended up basically grabbing Graydon Creed and throwing him into some alternate reality. But that's why we're here right now. Not only that, this Wolverine that you see is not actually Wolverine. Instead, it's a version of Sabretooth from Earth 33-441, and his name is Camo. Basically, he can turn into seemingly anybody. Now, the thing about this is, this guy looks like he has powers that are very similar to Copycat, but even Sabretooth makes this statement, right? He says, you even got the scent right. No one would know that it was not Wolverine. I bet your thoughts even sound like his. And he says, still trying to figure out how you're doing it. It's more than just mimicry. It's like you're rewiring my mind. Now, if I were a betting man, I would say that Camo's abilities are almost identical to Copycat. For those of you guys who don't know who Copycat is, do you remember in the Deadpool movie, Ryan Reynolds' girlfriend, Vanessa? That's Copycat. Technically, she's not Copycat in the movie, but in the comics, she's like Mystique, except she's better. Which is to say, Mystique can just physically turn and look like somebody else. Copycat copies them down to the genetic level and can even duplicate their powers. She cannot turn into animals, but Mystique can, which begs the question, if Copycat turns into Mystique, can she then turn around and turn into animals? I don't know. But the important thing here is this seems to be the reason why this guy was able to duplicate Wolverine and even smell like Wolverine, right? So by all standards of measurement, he was that guy. The other thing about this is that Sabretooth is a man on a mission. The consistent theme with his character ever since he was thrown into the pit during the beginning of House and Powers of X, and then his escape during the events of the original Sabretooth miniseries after House and Powers of X, is that he's been trying to destroy the Quiet Council, basically get revenge on the people who had thrown him into the pit itself. The result is that when he ended up liberating all these multiversal versions of himself, his idea was, we're gonna go kill the X-Men. But in order for you guys to understand what you're getting into, we're gonna kill the X-Men in your universe, so you can at least get some idea of what they're capable of. The X-Men here are a lot more capable than the ones that you're used to dealing with. Not only that, we're going to a place where every mutant that's in existence, or most every mutant in existence on Earth, is located in. Because one of the things to understand is that by the time the events of the fall of X had happened, the attack on Krakoa, mutants being scattered to the wind, Sabretooth was already gone. He has no idea that's happened. He doesn't know any of that's happened, right? As far as he's concerned, mutants are still just living on Krakoa and doing their thing. But the important thing here is there are hundreds of them there. So you don't just walk into Krakoa and start massacring people. So a lot of this is more or less training, them getting to understand what's going on. At that point, you switch over to the North Pole, and we end up picking up with X-Force. Now, the reason for this is because historically, as part of House and Powers of X, X-Force was kind of like the Black Ops wet work team of the X-Men, right? They go in, they do some really seedy stuff, they end up coming out, but it's kind of one of those, do whatever you have to do to accomplish the mission by any means necessary, right? That kind of thing. But following the whole circumstance where Beast had basically gone awry and then wanted to destroy humanity and so on and so forth, they'd more or less been on the run, right? That also comes off the heels of the fall of X, where they're more or less operating in hiding. Of course, you have Black Tom Cassidy, who controls plants, and that guy really kind of sets up a sort of perimeter around the area. And then you have Quentin Quire. Now, Quentin Quire is really, like, definitively one of the 3 most powerful telepaths on Earth. I would say one of the 4, right? Like you're talking about Jean Grey and Professor Xavier, Exodus, and Quentin Quire, right? Like their telepathy is off the charts. But what's going on here is they're having this conversation about the 250,000 mutants that were just sent off the island of Krakoa by Professor Xavier when the events of Fall of X kicked off, right? That whole thing took place in Immortal X-Men. We covered it in our coverage of the X-Men comics. There'll be a link to the playlist at the end of this if you need to get caught up. But they're all on their way back. The problem with this is they'll end up coming back through Krakoa. But as we know, ever since the end of Fall of X, the whole island is surrounded by Sentinels. If they show up there, it's gonna be a bloodbath, right? It's gonna be an absolute massacre. And even if the Sentinels are destroyed by these 250,000 mutants, you can imagine half of their number would be eradicated at the very least, right? Probably more than that. And so what you end up getting is Quentin Quire, who takes it on himself to basically travel to the island of Krakoa and then effectively turn it into a place where mutants can get through and then leave, right? Not stay there, but just kind of remove the Sentinel threat that's around there and call it a day, right? Kind of make it a place where they can pass through. While he's doing that, Sabretooth and his guys are all heading towards Earth. And when they get there, of course, using a cloaking device so they cannot be detected by these dozens of Sentinels that are floating around, that they end up realizing the entire place is empty, right? Like Sabretooth even comments to himself, he says, "This is not how the island looked when I was a prisoner in the pit. Let's take a closer look. Personal cloaking devices for the landing party." And as they look around, Sabretooth comes to the realization people cleared out in a rush. Whatever happened on Krakoa was not sweet. The mutants didn't just decide to leave, they fled. And so one of the things that I want you guys to notice here, and it's one of the coolest things that Marvel's doing with Sabretooth, historically speaking, Sabretooth, especially when you're talking about the Chris Claremont era back in like the 80s, he was a mindless beast, or not really mindless, but he was just like a feral, just violent, psychotic being that was out there, right? I mean, I'll tell you right now, like the old school 1980s Sabretooth was absolutely insane. I mean, it was amazing the kind of stories that you got with that guy. In more recent years, they toned him down and made him a little more intelligent. What this is doing is blending the two, right? All the experience, the battle-hardened experiences that he's had and all that kind of stuff, it all comes together to combine with his ferocious nature to make him just a absolute force of nature. And so that's why he figures out like that basically something happened here and everything went sideways. Now, in the midst of all of this, Quentin Quire shows up, and then he realizes that these Sentinels basically have psionic dampening abilities. Basically, they can kind of scramble his telepathic powers. He can't focus the way that he needs to, so he can't really use his psychic abilities to overcome these things. But once he looks down, he comes to the realization that Wolverine's down there, and initially he takes it as offense, right? Because he told Black Tom Cassidy, don't worry about getting a hold of Wolverine, I can do it on my own. But when he gets down to the island, he realizes it's not Wolverine, because out of the direct influence of the Sentinels, his telepathic abilities come back, and that's when we find out it's Camo. The guy plunges his claws through the neck of Quentin Quire. They whisk him back to the ship, if you want to call it that, of the Sabretooths, and they immediately start tearing him apart, right? This is happening in the main Marvel universe. Again, like Quentin Quire has just been killed off. One of the most powerful telepaths in Marvel has just been killed by Sabretooth. At that point, you jump back to the North Pole. This time you pick up with Daken. Technically he's going by the name Akihiro, which is fine, but like it's Daken, Fang, any number of names you want to call him, Dark Wolverine, whatever, it's all basically the same thing. But there's a kind of bonding moment that's happening between himself and Wolverine. Now, he's also joined by Rico, also known as Scorpion Boy. Basically, he's a mutant whose power makes him look like an actual scorpion. But there's a kind of bonding moment between the two, because Wolverine, in a lot of ways, kind of greets Daken as a son. And that's kind of how things have been going for a little while. But this is a very tumultuous thing. And the reason why is understanding the history between the two. Daken never knew his father. And in fact, Daken believed that Wolverine was like a straight up villain, right? Like he wanted to kill his dad. More so than that, he was a pure villain in his early appearances. The old stories involving like the Dark X-Men during like Dark Reign and all that kind of stuff. But the journey of Daken over the years has been one of redemption. The problem with this is that Marvel has been so back and forth and so inconsistent on how they handle his character that it's just one of those things where he kind of free floats, right? And he's just kind of left to the whims and the desires of whoever it is that happens to be writing the story at the time. More so than that he basically tells them like, get to butchering on this caribou that I brought here, and then I'm gonna go back, do, some checking around on the, make the rounds, all that kind of stuff, make sure everything's cool. When I get back, we'll feast, we'll laugh, and then we'll go to sleep, that kind of thing. And so what he does is he gets inside the main base of X-Force and he has this really, really cool monologue, right? And people who know about the history between Sabretooth and Wolverine immediately know what he's about to talk about, because what he says here is, we had more than a home in Krakoa, we had a nation, a family, both biological and chosen. Daken, Laura, Scout, Xavier, Jean, Sage, Quentin Quire, together we had a shot at happiness. Maybe Sabretooth factored into that. Creed was thrown in the pit, my greatest enemy. For almost as far back as I can remember, at every point, Sabretooth was a part of the worst of it. For once in my very long life, I didn't have that constant creeping dread that Sabretooth was just over my shoulder, ready to wreak havoc. That all came crashing down when Orcus attacked the Hellfire Gala and most of mutant kind ended up dead or exiled. This North Pole base, the greenhouse, is what remains. I'm doing the best I can to protect it. And so that's when he meets with Sage and he meets with Black Tom Cassidy. And what they reveal is that they have basically set up a kind of perimeter around the whole area, right? So no one is going to get in there without them knowing that they're there. More so than that, Sage picks up on the idea that Wolverine's worried about something in particular. She doesn't really know what it is, but she knows that something's a little off. Now, this is the cool moment here, because this is something that Marvel has not focused on for quite some time, and I'm so glad to see they brought it back. What they end up doing here is they say Creed was banished in the pit in the dark belly of Krakoa. Supposedly, he's still there because Wolverine doesn't know that Sabretooth got out. And he says, but for a short time, I'd been dragged down to the same prison. My memories are ragged. I know his stain was there, like a nightmare programmed into the island's DNA, but I don't recall encountering him otherwise. It's enough to make a guy paranoid, especially on this of all nights. Sabretooth had this sick tradition of bringing me pain for my birthday. Now, here's the reason why that's so cool, is because for the longest time in Marvel Comics, one, Wolverine and Sabretooth were just straight up pure enemies. But for the longest time, every year on his birthday, Sabretooth would kill someone close to Wolverine, whether it be a lover, a wife, a friend, a teammate, it didn't matter. But he would literally kill them, and then Wolverine would discover the corpse. He would realize it was Sabretooth. He would go to the fight. Sabretooth would just be waiting for him, and the two of them would have this knockdown, drag out fight. Back in the 80s, they were just brutal fights. More recently, it's just kind of like cats scratching at each other. But now we're getting to like some really dark stuff here, because what happens is Sabretooth's forces bring a device that seemingly holds the actual brain of Quentin Quire. And the reason why I say that is because they fire off this kind of energy blast at the island, which neutralizes Black Tom Cassidy and Sage. But because their eyes light up, it looks more like telepathic influence. So literally, they channel the power of one of the most powerful telepaths in the world and use it to shut down the defense system. And so following that, you basically switch over to Daken himself as he's going through and essentially butchering this caribou. And he kind of has this little bit of a conversation with Scorpion Boy, right? Where he says that Logan and I, we've had our rough spots. That's probably an understatement. They literally tried to kill each other. And I'm pretty sure Daken succeeded in killing him at one point, right? When Wolverine went to hell. But he says, we've both done terrible things to each other is more accurate. things were okay on Krakoa, but something about that place, I don't know, it felt like forcing a hug. Right now's different. Right now, we actually need each other. Not just me and him either, but all of us. Do you know what I mean? Right now, when he asked that question, Scorpion Boy has these two hands that just rip through his chest, and literally Sabretooth tears him in half. And he tells Dakin, it's midnight, you know what that means. And I'm here to give the runt a gift he'll never forget. And this guy tears Dakin apart, literally, because what happens is Wolverine comes back, right? Wolverine gets back here to the campsite and he asks him, right, Dakin, like, did you get that butchering done? And the answer is, I mean, yeah, but not really in the way that you think, because Wolverine, my friend, it wasn't the caribou that was butchered, it was Dakin, because Sabretooth and his guys are waiting on him, and his son was literally torn to pieces and his body parts laid out in such a way that it spells happy birthday. It's gruesome and amazing. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end because this comic comes out twice a month. So the next issue comes out either this coming week or the week after. If you guys need to get caught up on Fall of X, Sabretooth, all that stuff, make sure you click this link to the playlist and I will catch you all later. Peace.